Benigna volontade, in che si liqua sempre l'amor che drittamente spira, come cupidità fa nella iniqua silenzio puose a quella dolce lira, e fece quietar le sante corde che la destra del cielo allenta e tira. Come saranno ai giusti preghi sorde quelle sustanze che per darmi voglia ch'io le pregassi a tacer fur concorde? Bene a che senza termine si doglia chi, per amor di cosa che non duri eternalmente, quello amor si spoglia.
There is an actual pause in that God has silenced the Beati and they're expressing their love for Dante, the carità, through this silence. So I think it's quite a pregnant and important pause for the reader.
I was just going to pick up on your point, because it seems to me that you're also saying that this opening sequence works across the canto break as well, so that you can't read it in isolation from what's gone before, and yet it takes on a particular emphasis because there is a canto break. Would you normally do that in reading a Dante canto or a Dante sequence? Would you think that the positioning of breaks and the linkages or fractures are important factors?
Definitely.
Yeah, I have a slightly different take on it. We always know in the commedia where a canto starts and a canto ends. We can't escape that fact because we have a double rhyme instead of a triple rhyme at the beginning and the end. And there's all sorts of reasons as to why Dante may have done this and what the consequences were. You made the very good point about caritas, about sort of the relationship between what this canto is about, between the souls on one side, God, and the living human being on the other, and all the implications of that. Well, my pause, the way I read, and it probably reflects in the kind of things that interest me, is much more rhetorically driven in the best sense of the word rhetoric. I'm looking at it, how does it work as a piece of poetry at this point? And to me, that those first 9 tercets or so really, work together as this extraordinary bravado piece of writing. Again, bravado in the most positive sense that I can place on that particular word. This is just somebody who is at the absolute height of his poetic powers, of his ability to manipulate language and the potentialities of language. And of course it works brilliantly as an introduction to what's going to come next. It's there, if you want, as a kind of overture to everything that's going to come next. The meeting with a relative, the whole Florence thing, etc., etc.
Yeah. At a meeting which is going to include quite a lot about language and how to use
Absolutely.
language.
Yeah.
Can I pick up on your point about double rhymes and triple rhymes? Because surely in Dante, a pause can only be so long, or indeed, actually a pause can only be pregnant, is the word you use, because the terza rima, you're waiting for that rhyme to be resolved. You always have that hanging rhyme in the middle of a tercet. So if sit on a pause too long in Dante, then surely that's perhaps that's disingenuous to the movement of the text.
I couldn't agree with you more. We have a whole... It's kind of interesting. We're already going off away from the canto, which is fine. But, and that's what supervisions do, There's a whole series of problems that your question raises. Yeah, at a general point, I agree with you entirely. And one of the things I always say at some point in my first class at the beginning of a course, I say to a student, just keep moving. In a sense, the rhyme encourages that. Just don't stop. Just keep moving. Read it as an adventure story. Forget about the notes. Just keep going. And that's the way you're being pushed forward. And the narrative is largely a narrative of movement. Not exclusively. We have moments of stasis. Purgatorio is an excellent example of that. But we actually have, if you want, there's a more technical problem here. It's almost certain that individual canticles circulated on their own, as Dante composes. There's also a fair amount of circumstantial evidence to suggest that really the Commedia circulated as batches of canti, that Dante would release batches of canti, a little bit like, you know, TV series, you know. Yeah. And we need to be aware of that Dante must have also been aware of the fact that this text, which is a text that wants to keep moving forward, and there's a kind of propulsive character to the text, was actually going to be in the way in which an episode of Game of Thrones is stopped, and then there's a week before you can see the next one.